Booker asked Patel one question about loyalty, then told him exactly what comes next. The exchange started with a yes that became a no. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey walked into the hearing room with a specific line of inquiry and a specific endpoint. He was not going to spend his time on general criticism of the FBI's direction. He was going to document a pattern piece by piece and end with a prediction. The prediction was the argument. He asked Kash Patel, FBI director, whether he had had discussions with the White House about removing FBI personnel before he was confirmed to the position. Patel said yes. Then he said no. Booker read the answer back to him. So you're saying you had no discussions with the White House before you were in the position about the removal of any personnel from the agency? Patel said he had had numerous discussions involving the type of people that would be employed and that those failing to meet the mark would no longer be employed if he was confirmed. Booker said he was assuming that mark had to do with loyalty to the Trump administration. Patel said no. That opening exchange set the structure for everything that followed. A question with a specific yes or no answer. An answer that was neither yes nor no. A reframe. A specific follow-up that named the reframe. And then a denial of the thing that had just been documented in the exchange itself. The pattern is worth naming before the specific evidence is laid out, because it recurred throughout Booker's entire time. Patel did not say, I don't know when he had information. He did not say, I can't answer that for legal reasons when legal reasons did not apply. He said things that were adjacent to answers, things that sounded like engagement with the question while declining to answer it. A former federal prosecutor on the committee would recognize this as a specific testimonial strategy. It is the strategy of a witness who has been prepared to manage questions without answering them. Booker had worked with FBI agents in Newark. He had watched this kind of testimony before. He had prepared for it. This channel tracks the documentation as it moves through the legal system. If you want to follow where this goes, subscribe and turn on notifications. New videos drop when the record produces something worth documenting. Let's start with the grand jury question because it demonstrates the deflection pattern before the substantive institutional damage is laid out. He said yes. Then he said no. Then the transcript question. Then the Stephen Miller question. The pattern held through every subject. Booker asked Patel whether he had testified before the grand jury that President Trump had declassified the documents at issue in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. Patel said he didn't have the grand jury transcript. He said whatever it says is the best evidence. Booker noted that Patel had told Senator Whitehouse that his grand jury testimony had been publicly released. He noted it had not been. In fact, in July, a court denied a news outlet's bid to obtain that transcript. But the court had also stated clearly that Patel was free to discuss his own grand jury testimony. Booker said, you know right now whether or not you testify that Trump declassified those documents. Why are you refusing to answer that simple yes or no question? Patel said the premise of the question was inaccurate. Let's examine the legal mechanism Patel was using as cover, because Booker dismantled it in real time. Under Rule 6 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, grand jury proceedings are secret. But that secrecy obligation applies to government attorneys, court reporters, and jurors. It does not apply to the witnesses. A witness who testifies before a grand jury is not prohibited from discussing their own testimony. Patel was not bound by Rule 6 to stay silent. He was choosing to stay silent and using the general concept of grand jury secrecy as a shield for a choice that the law does not require him to make. Booker named this directly. He and I both understand the law. Under Rule 6, a grand jury witness is not barred from sharing their grand jury testimony. This is an oversight hearing. This is germane to your integrity and credibility. Patel said the premise of his question was inaccurate. There is no premise to investigate. Either Patel told the grand jury that Trump declassified those documents or he did not. That is a binary fact he knows. He was in the room. He made the statements that were recorded in the transcript. He remembers whether he testified about declassification. The court that denied the news outlet's bid for the transcript did so on its own procedural grounds. That ruling does not bind Patel. The ruling binds the court's custodians of the transcript. Patel, the witness, is free to say what he said. The Supreme Court and the major circuit courts have been consistent on this. The privilege of grand jury secrecy belongs to the institution, not to the individual witness who appears before it. Patel was invoking the institutional privilege as if it were his personal right. It is not. His refusal to answer the question about his own testimony is itself information. It is a documented refusal to answer a yes or no question about a fact he knows. Now let's talk about Brian Driscoll. The grand jury deflection was documented. The yes that became a no was in the record. Now a specific name. Booker named him specifically. 20 years of distinguished service to the FBI. Special agent in charge of the FBI's Newark field office. The field office in Booker's own state. The agents Booker said he had worked with. Medal of Valor. Shield of Bravery. two of the highest commendations the FBI awards for exceptional acts of courage and valor in the line of duty. Patel fired him. The termination letter was dated October 8, 2025. The stated authority was Article 2 of the Constitution. Booker noted the specific problem with that framing. Article 2 vests executive power in the President of the United States. Patel is not the President. The question of what authority an FBI director has to terminate a career civil servant by invoking a constitutional provision that grants power to a different officer is a legal question that Patel declined to address on the grounds that the matter was under litigation. Driscoll is one of three plaintiffs in a lawsuit alleging that Patel carried out a campaign of retribution against FBI employees for failure to demonstrate sufficient political loyalty. The lawsuit uses that phrase directly. Political loyalty, not performance, not standards. Not the mark that Patel had described in his opening answer. Loyalty to the president. The Driscoll case is significant beyond its individual facts because it illustrates the specific mechanism by which institutional knowledge is depleted. Driscoll was not a junior agent who had been on the job for a few years. He was the special agent in charge of a major field office. That level of seniority represents not just years of service, but accumulated relationships with informants, with prosecutors, with the judiciary, with partner agencies that cannot be transferred to a replacement through an orientation package. When a special agent in charge with 20 years of experience is removed, the operational knowledge they carried does not file itself in a folder for the next person to read. It leaves with them. The investigations they were managing, the sources they had cultivated, the cases they understood at a granular level. All of that is disrupted. The 14-year timeline Patel himself cited for filling vacancies is in part a reflection of this dynamic. You cannot replace 20 years of specific operational knowledge with a hiring process. This is the institutional damage documented in a specific case. 20 years. Medal of Valor. Article 2. Fired. Then came the Stephen Miller question. The Driscoll termination was documented. The lawsuit was filed. Now the question of who Patel was consulting while making these decisions. Booker asked whether Patel had had discussions with Stephen Miller about Brian Driscoll specifically or about Driscoll's continuance at the FBI. Patel said not that he recalled. Booker asked how often Patel spoke to Stephen Miller. Patel said frequently, on Homeland Security task forces. Booker said, you frequently talk with Stephen Miller about subjects other than Homeland Security task force issues. Patel said he frequently talked to Miller about Homeland Security task forces. Booker said, has Stephen Miller ever given you his opinions on how to run your agency? Patel said Miller's interagency operations were invaluable to the FBI. Let's examine what is documented here. The FBI director speaks frequently with Stephen Miller, a senior political advisor to the president with no law enforcement role and no confirmed position overseeing the FBI. Patel acknowledged this. He described Miller's input as invaluable. He confirmed speaking with him frequently. He declined to specify what subjects those conversations cover beyond the task force framing. A lawsuit involving the termination of a career FBI agent alleges that the terminations were carried out based on political loyalty. The FBI director speaks frequently with the president's political advisor and describes those conversations as invaluable to running his agency. Those facts sit in the record without editorializing. The connection between them is available for examination by anyone who reads the transcript. The 20% figure is the scale of the institutional reorientation. 20%. 1 in 5. The consequences of the Stephen Miller conversations and the Brian Driscoll dismissals visible at scale. According to ICE data and analysis by the Cato Institute, a conservative think tank, 20% of all FBI agents have been diverted from their assigned work to assist ICE with immigration enforcement. 1 in 5 FBI agents, not reassigned from administrative roles or support functions, from their investigative work, from the cases they were building, from the task forces they were staffing. Booker asked a specific question. Have any FBI agents who investigate crimes against children been assigned to immigration enforcement? Patel did not say no. He challenged the premise. Booker asked, have any FBI agents who investigate foreign and domestic terrorism been reassigned? Patel did not say no. He pointed to arrest statistics. The non-denial is the answer. Patel had the data to refute Booker's claims if they were false. He had just spent portions of the hearing citing specific numbers. If no child crimes investigators had been reassigned to immigration enforcement, he could have said so directly. He did not. Then came the 14-year admission. Booker noted that Patel had acknowledged to Senator Coons earlier in the hearing that it would take 14 years to fill the vacancies at the agency. Many of those vacancies, Booker argued, were the result of Patel's own purge of experienced personnel. This is the most significant concession in the hearing, and it came from Patel's own testimony, not from Booker's characterization, not from a Democratic critic's estimate, from the FBI director himself. Patel said on the record that it would take 14 years to fill the vacancies, an institution whose institutional knowledge resides in its experienced personnel. The agents who know the counterintelligence cases, the organized crime networks, the foreign influence operations, the sources they have cultivated over careers, had been depleted to the point where its own director testified that recovery would take a generation. 14 years is not an administrative gap. It is a generational one. The threat environment that exists today. The foreign adversaries running influence operations, the domestic terrorist networks, the organized crime structures, the child exploitation networks that experienced investigators have spent years mapping, does not pause for 14 years while an institution rebuilds the expertise to monitor it. The vacancies Patel described will exist during a period in which the threats those vacancies were designed to address continue to operate. The institutional knowledge that was pushed out does not return when the positions are eventually refilled. New agents start at the beginning. The relationships, the source networks, the accumulated understanding of specific criminal enterprises. Those are built over careers, not recovered through hiring. The question Booker was implying is the question Patel's own number raises. If the director of the FBI knows it will take 14 years to recover from the current personnel situation, and that situation is substantially the product of his own decisions, then what does that calculation say about the decisions? The arrest statistics Patel cited are real. 23,000 violent felons, 6,000 weapons seized, 1,500 child predators arrested, 4,700 children found, 1,600 kilograms of fentanyl. Those numbers represent the work of the agents in the field, the people who show up every day regardless of what is happening at the top of the organization. Booker acknowledged this. He said that no matter how bad the leadership was, it could not undermine the legacy of the agents who fight every day to keep people safe. But the arrest statistics and the institutional damage are not the same thing. They measure different phenomena. The arrests are what field agents produce in a single year. The 14-year recovery timeline is what the purge of experienced leadership produces over a generation. Both can be true simultaneously. A ship can still be moving while its navigation system is being dismantled. The direction changes after the dismantling is complete. Then Booker made the loyalty argument. The institutional damage was in the record. The deflections were documented. 14 years to recover from his own mouth. Now the question of who this was all for. He had documented the institutional damage. He had documented the deflections. Now the question underneath all of it. And this is where the exchange moved from institutional analysis to something more personal. He said, there is a pattern in this administration. You do what is asked. You absorb the criticism. You protect the president. And then one day you become inconvenient. This is not a political attack. It is a historical pattern with a documented record spanning 2 administrations. The list of people who served Trump loyally and were then discarded is long and bipartisan in its political cost. Cabinet officials, lawyers, chiefs of staff, advisors, people who took the criticism, ran the interference, made the public statements, absorbed the institutional costs of their loyalty, and then found themselves out. Sometimes by tweets, sometimes by news leak, sometimes with a specific humiliation of being told they were fired before the public announcement was made. The pattern has a consistent structure. The person in question demonstrates loyalty through a specific act or a series of acts that carry political or legal risk for them personally. The president benefits from those acts. The relationship holds as long as the person continues to be useful or as long as the cost of cutting them loose exceeds the benefit. When that calculus changes, when the person becomes a liability, or when someone more useful is available, or when the president's interests and the person's interests diverge, the loyalty runs out. Booker was asking Patel to consider which side of that history he was building his career on, not as a warning from an opponent, as a statement of pattern that Patel himself should be able to read. The pattern has specific names attached to it. Michael Cohen, Trump's personal fixer for years, went to prison in part for work done on Trump's behalf, was not pardoned by the president he had protected. Bill Barr served as Attorney General, ran interference on multiple investigations, issued public statements defending the president's conduct, and was eventually characterized by Trump as weak and ineffective when he acknowledged the results of the 2020 election. Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who served through Trump's first term, publicly criticized after leaving office in terms that left no ambiguity about the president's feelings. John Kelly, White House Chief of Staff, managed the most turbulent period of the first term, described as a disaster by Trump after leaving. Each of those people made choices that prioritized the president's preferences or interests over other institutional obligations. Each of them was eventually, in different ways and on different timelines, discarded. Patel was not in the position of an outside observer being warned about a pattern he didn't know. He had access to the same record Booker was describing. The question Booker was posing was not whether the pattern existed. It was whether Patel believed he would be the exception. He said, "I think you're not going to be around long. I think this might be your last oversight hearing, because as much as you supplicate yourself to the will of Donald Trump and not the Constitution, Donald Trump has shown us in his first term and in this term that he is not loyal to people like you. He will cut you loose." That sentence landed in the room as a specific, documented prediction rather than a rhetorical flourish. The word supplicate is precise. It describes a posture of submission, not service, not professionalism, not constitutional compliance, but submission to a specific person's will. Booker was saying that Patel had reorganized one of the most important law enforcement institutions in the world around the preferences of a person who has a documented history of cutting loose the people who do exactly that. Patel called it a rant of false information. The characterization is itself a deflection strategy. A rant is a form of speech that is emotional and uncontrolled, that substitutes volume and feeling for evidence. Booker's closing was the opposite. It was a structured enumeration of documented facts. Task forces disbanded, institutional knowledge purged, hiring standards lowered, 14 years to fill vacancies, 20% of agents diverted, child crimes investigators not denied as reassigned. Each point in the list was a documented fact that Patel had either confirmed, failed to deny, or admitted to in the hearing. Calling it a rant does not change what is in the transcript. Then he said, "It's my time, not yours." Booker said, "The people of New Jersey tell me what my time is." The exchange that followed moved to the chairman and then to a procedural dispute about whether Patel had been talking over senators throughout the hearing. Booker noted that he had. The chairman gave Patel his response time. Then he said to the chairman, "I am not afraid of you, Mr. Chairman, not afraid of you." The statement was directed at the chair, not at Patel. Booker was telling the room that the institutional pressure of the hearing, the majority chairman, the FBI director's resistance, the procedural mechanics being deployed to limit his time, was not going to change what he had said or retract what he had documented. He was not afraid of the authority being exercised over the proceedings. He was keeping his own record of what had been said. Patel read the statistics. The record contains everything: the arrest statistics and the 14-year recovery timeline, the Medal of Valor and the Article 2 termination letter, the frequent Miller conversations and the non-denial of child crimes investigators being reassigned, the yes that became a no about pre-confirmation White House discussions, the disbanded task forces and the counterintelligence arrests, the 4,700 children found and the 20% of agents pulled from their mission-critical work to do it. All of it is in the same transcript, produced in the same hearing, under the authority of the same director. The record does not resolve the tension between those two categories. It documents that both exist simultaneously in the same institution under the same leadership. Booker ended by saying he prayed for Patel, that he hoped Patel could step up and defend his oath, defend the Constitution, and do a much better job of defending the country. The prayer is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a specific kind of statement that carries weight precisely because it is not what the moment conventionally requires. The conventional close of an oversight exchange like this one. Following accusations of institutional destruction, a documented loyalty argument, and a prediction about the subject's professional future would be a political statement about accountability or call for resignation. Booker did not close that way. He said he prayed for Patel, not as a political position, as a personal one. The prayer acknowledges that Patel is a person with the capacity to make different choices than the choices he had made. It addresses him as someone who could still step up and defend his oath rather than as someone whose failure is already fixed. It is the close of a person who had spent his 5 minutes documenting the institutional damage and still found, at the end of it, something other than contempt. Whether that close landed as intended is a different question. What it produced in the record is a senator's documented hope expressed in the register of personal prayer rather than political demand, that the person he had just spent 5 minutes indicting might do better. The prayer is in the record. The institutional damage is in the record. The loyalty argument is in the record. The prediction is in the record. He will cut you loose. That prediction is also in the record. The question is when.